Welcome to the Studio Drummer Chats. My name is Jonathan Asks, and this is a podcast about drumming, yes, but also creativity, music production, covering lots of things. If you're a creative person, I think you'll find some episodes in here that will be useful to you. And if you're a drummer or a music producer, you certainly will find some episodes that will be useful to you. Today is a drum-centric subject, and I'm going to be discussing what is the role of a drummer? What are we doing back there, So one of the first things that I ask my new students when they come in to take drum lessons, a lot of times they are very young and something has sparked their interest in the drums. And of course, I'm trying to figure out what that is, what they've seen, what they've heard. Maybe a parent has said, oh, that would be a cool instrument, or maybe they have a lot of energy. Maybe they're playing the pots and pans. Who knows, But one of the first questions that I ask most of my students is, imagine you're in a band and you're sitting here behind the drum set, and there's a bass player over there, and there's a guitar player over there, and there's a singer over there, and a keyboard player over there. And you're sitting behind these drums, and you're playing. What is it you're doing? What is the purpose of you being there? Like, what is your job? What is your role? What exactly are you doing? And I get a huge range of answers on that. And most commonly, I get keeping the beat. And I always tell my students, that is a great answer. Keeping the beat. That's their simple way. A lot of these students have never touched a drum set. They don't even have sticks yet. And that's their simple way of saying, being the timekeeper, keeping the beat. A lot of times they don't have any idea. A lot of times I've had some really cool, fun answers like, entertaining the people. That's a cool one. I've had, making music. That's a good one. All kinds of fun answers that I get from my students. So, but I wanted to talk about that a little bit today because, as we look back a little bit throughout the history of drummers, I think that the role of a drummer is shifting and changing a little bit, has been for many decades now. So, role of a drummer. So this podcast might be useful to those of you that are just starting to play. And I think there'll be a few things in here for those of you that have been playing for a long time, that are in deep, that are advanced. The thing that I follow up with on that question when I'm teaching new students, one of the things I try to do in my first lesson is give them a sense of what we're going to be doing in drum lessons. I treat it as kind of a trial, and sometimes it is a trial, to say, okay, here's what we do. We do this, we do this, we do this, and this is how you get good at playing the drums, while all the time, of course, trying to keep it fun. But one of the things I'll sometimes demonstrate is I'll say, okay, so imagine I'm playing a song here, and this is a silly example of what a drummer would not want to do. So I'll sit down and I'll start a beat at 90 beats a minute or something, just without a metronome. And then all of a sudden I'll start speeding up. I'll speed up to like 140 beats a minute. And then I'll slow back down really, really fast down to 60 beats a minute, just doing something kind of silly. And I'll say, this is what a drummer would not want to do. This is what a drummer would want to do. And then I'll give them a 1, 2, 3, and I'll jump into a beat and I'll play a really steady groove. And I'll say, you're exactly right what you said about keeping the beat. Because one of the drummer's jobs is to make sure that the rest of the band doesn't speed up or slow down. And of course, they've never thought of this concept. They don't have any idea really what I'm talking about yet. And so one thing I do almost from day one is I'll turn a metronome on. I start working with metronomes in the first lesson. And I will, put on a click and I'll say, this computer here has a perfect time. And we're not perfect, we're human. And one of the things that makes what we do sound so cool is that we're not perfect. And we'll talk about that more later, but just know for now that we're not trying to be a computer, but we need some sort of standard. We need some kind of something that tells us if we're speeding up or slowing down, and that's what these metronomes do. They tell us if we're speeding up or slowing down. So I'll put on a metronome and play along with the beat. Maybe I'll count out loud, 1, 2, 3, 4, because I'm already trying to teach them before we even discuss it that the snare is going to be on 2 and 4 and that the bass is going to be on 1 and 3. So setting up the role of a drummer as a timekeeper, that's kind of a good starting point. Even though that role continues to kind of shift and change, as I'll talk about a little bit, and it still is, I think, the fundamental point of contact for us drummers. We're there to establish the time. So I look at the timekeeping element of drumming. For me, it's a foundational element of a piece of music. I look at it as the foundation of a house. The huge, giant concrete slab that everything else goes on top of. That's kind of my visual image. Sometimes I convey that. Sometimes I say those words. Sometimes I don't. I do talk about building from the ground up with students. So foundation is a good word for me in terms of how I visualize it. Support is another word for me, and that can mean not only being the timekeeper and being the thing that keeps everything steady and grounded, but support can also mean moving the music in a direction. So you're supporting the other musicians, you're helping them achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve in that moment. So that brings me to my next point after timekeeper, and that is the role of a drummer, in my opinion, is to propel the music forward. So this can mean, well, here's a few tools that drummers use to propel the music forward. Dynamics, a classic thing that you'll hear if you're listening to any sort of modern pop music, or even all the way back to classic rock and all kinds of music, is you might hear a more subdued, quieter verse section of a song, and then it might get a little bit louder on the chorus. This is something that not only drummers use, but a lot of musicians use, and producers use as well, and mixers use. You might, if you're paying close attention to modern mixes, you may notice that the chorus is a little bit louder. And this is something that we use to make the chorus of a song or the hook of a song more exciting and more in your face. So propelling the music forward, dynamics is certainly a great tool. We might do something different in the bridge. We might do something different on the outro, all these things. Another thing that I will list about propelling music forward is musical accentuation. So, sometimes we might be very subtle things that we do, the change of a bass drum pattern, to not so subtle things like a drum fill or a drum fill and a crash, to accentuate what's going on musically. And I might talk about this a little bit more, but basically I think of that as fills and accents and things like that. The third thing that I would say that is an important element of a good drummer is the role of a rhythmic composer. So, we commonly just say, oh, I'm just writing, I'm just making a drum part, but really we're rhythmic composers. We're creating small compositions throughout the song that hopefully fit the music. If you're playing something different on the chorus than you are on the verse, then you are composing rhythms. So this gets into a whole world of creativity and genre-specific types of parts and things like that. What you would do on a pop gig would be entirely different than what you would do on a jazz gig or a fusion gig, etc., or a world music gig. But rhythmic composers. So this is the ability to be creative to think of things that will propel the song forward in the most effective way with your take on it. So this is something that is developed over time, comes from listening to other drummers. It comes from playing a lot. It comes from honestly just practicing writing parts. And a couple of ways you can do that is you can pick a template and you can play along with songs that are already in existence, or you can try writing your own songs and playing along with those. You can take a click track and try playing along with that, and you can change parts, imagine parts in your head as you're playing. It could be a bass part or a keyboard part or a guitar riff. These are all ways you can sit down and just practice composing rhythmic parts. The best way to do it is to play with songs. And for most people, that means playing with other musicians if you don't play other instruments, if you don't play guitar or bass, or if you don't produce or make your own music. So the third role is as a rhythmic composer. And remember, even in the context of a very simple four on the floor pop song, that one well-placed crash or fill or hi-hat open or something very, very small and simple can make a huge difference, even in a minimalist context like that. Okay, so now let's talk about some just general genre-specific and gig-specific differences when it comes to the role of a drummer. So if you are playing, let's go genre-specific first. If you're playing, say, jazz or blues, and those are two fairly different categories, but sometimes they cross paths and sometimes they're related depending on the subgenre. But in those contexts, you're probably going to be creating on the spot. You're probably not going to be playing with a click. And you're pretty good odds you're going to be playing with other musicians. So let's expand on that for just a second. This takes us into the world of classic rock, and this could be in a live situation or a studio situation in those genres and things like that. So let's say jazz, blues, classic rock. Those are areas where, again, probably not playing with a click, probably playing with other musicians. So in that role, you really are being relied upon to keep steady time and to move the time forward. And sometimes that can mean that you have to adapt to what other members in the band are doing. So sometimes to keep a track from crashing and burning, you have to speed up or slow down. Ideally, we would like to be in 100% control of that. We would like to be playing with musicians that have good enough time that they understand that they need to follow you, or that you can all move together, that you've got the chemistry and you've played together enough that you can move together when needed. And the best example that I have of that that's kind of universally known would be like a John Bonham. So for those of you, if you're not familiar with Led Zeppelin, here's a fun experiment. Go listen to a few Led Zeppelin tracks. It doesn't really matter which ones because they're all great. All the drumming on them's great. All the songs are great. And download an app called Live BPM. Live BPM will tell you the tempo that's happening, and it will draw a graph as if there are any tempo changes as it speeds up or slows down. And it's fascinating to look at Zeppelin in particular, and John Bonham, because when you listen to their songs just casually, I mean, they are rock solid. The groove is just there. It sounds and feels so good. But when you start to study the tempos, you realize that they move a lot. The songs speed up and slow down. The thing that makes it sound and seem so seamless is the command and control with which John Bonham has. He's got a natural feel for that type of playing. He came from a jazz influenced background. which also has a tendency to move around a pretty good bit in terms of tempo. And the musicians that he's playing with adapt beautifully. They move together like a well-oiled jazz group. I don't know what that would look like if you oiled up a jazz group, but you get my point. The best example of this that I know of in a live context, and most of their records were the rhythm sections at the very least are recorded live. So if you pick any record, you're going to hear the most likely rhythm guitars and bass and drums were all recorded at the same time, and then maybe they went back and overdubbed more rhythm guitars or the lead. But if you want to hear something live, the BBC sessions are a great example of them just killing it live. And again, so that's one possibility that you may find yourself in if you play those genres of music. And again, you have a classic rock band, but the drummer's heavily influenced by jazz and blues. And so you have this sense of motion. And he is also very, very good at all these things that I've mentioned in terms of being the foundation, the support, propelling the music forward via dynamics and accenting the music in terms of the fills that he plays and creating rhythmic compositions. All these things Bonham was brilliant at. So there's lots of good examples, but I just want to keep it simple and give you that one to go check out. And if you want to see exactly how much those tempos move around, check out that app called Live BPM. And you can compare that to maybe a drum machine or something that's electronic, and you can see how much those move in comparison. So that's a fun experiment. So let's look at another sort of type or genre of music. So let's move into the pop world. Anything that's considered pop in the U.S., which I would put country under that umbrella as well. And of course, even world music, there are huge rock stars all over the planet that we've never heard of. But any culture that's in the pop genre, most of this will apply. So you have a studio-driven click. So in other words, when you're recording pop records, almost everybody is playing with a click. And when you're playing live, everyone is playing with a click. So how does this change the role of a drummer? Well, if everyone's playing with a click, you're sort of moving together with not only with a click, but usually sequenced parts. You're kind of moving together with the same pulse. So you're not necessarily relying on the drummer at that point, because really the drummer, the timekeeper, is the click or the sequence or those sorts of things. So in that case, the band is moving together differently. Now, everyone can listen to each other and listen to the click and the sequence parts at the same time, and that's what good musicians do in a live context. But it does change the dynamics and the feel of a song if you're not relying 100% on the drummer. An alternate would be if you have good musicians in a band, the drummer's playing with a click and everyone's following the drummer. That's another possibility in that situation. But most concerts that you go to these days that are in any sort of popular genre, popular world music, heavy metal, everyone is listening to the same click because they're flying in all kinds of parts and things that have to be exactly on cue. So a couple of drummers that I want to throw out there, old school guys that I think are phenomenal with a click and just can make the music sound really good even when they're playing with a click. My first drummer is Gary Husband. And what I'd like you to do is go check out his work with Level 42. Level 42 was a pop band in the 80s and I believe into the 90s, kind of new wave pop. And when you hear these tracks, you're going to think it's a drum machine because his time is so amazing. but yet when you hear it, it feels good, and you're like, well, it doesn't really sound like a drum machine, but it kind of does. And that's the brilliance of Gary Husband and his amazing timekeeping ability. But then, after you've listened to him play pop, and you've listened to him play like a well-oiled machine, there's that term again, a well-oiled drum machine, go check out his work with Alan Holdsworth. So I went through this kind of backwards. I saw Gary Husband live. I had heard Level 42 and knew he played with Level 42, but wasn't really in the forefront of my mind when I saw him play with Alan Holdsworth in the 90s, probably. And watching him play live, I was just amazed with his ability to play with the time and always know where the one was, but yet just play in and out of time over the bar line in odd time signatures, but yet still convey this ultimate sense of pulse. And that ultimate sense of pulse came from the fact probably that he had done a lot of work playing with drum machines and metronomes. I assume he may be particularly gifted in this area. It sure sounds like it. I don't know exactly how much time he spent playing with drum machines, or playing with metronomes, but he certainly is able to adapt incredibly well to that. So Husband is someone, I bring him up because he can play with metronomic precision, but yet still make it feel good. But then he can also play an amazing amount of complex fusion music and still make that feel good and still make you aware of the pulse. This is not an easy thing to do. The next drummer I'd like to mention is Vinny Colaiuta. Vinny is well known by all of us that are drummers, and got his start with Frank Zappa, and later played with Sting and Joni Mitchell, and just all kinds of. He's a session drummer. He's played on a lot of tracks, a lot of hits that we've heard. This is another guy that can kind of do both, not kind of, but can really do both in terms of he can lay down a groove, make it feel really good, but then when he starts to cut loose and play in a fusion context or play in a more complex context, the pulse is still really, really strong. The best example I know of this is his solo album. If you have not heard Vinny's solo album, check it out. It's, I believe it was the 90s it was released, but you get to hear a wide gambit of him playing some groove-oriented things, even into some really complex things. And of course, you can hear him groove really, really hard with Sting, and you can hear him shred like crazy, Jeff Beck, or a number of other artists. I bring him up again because of his metronomic precision, but yet his ability to make the music feel good. So if our role is as a timekeeper and as someone that can propel the music forward and as a rhythmic composer, how do we practice these things? And I've touched on these a little bit. I'm going to say for timekeeper, just play with a metronome. There are all kinds. I did a video recently on my YouTube channel about playing with a gap click, and that's a really great and quick way to see if you're speeding up or slowing down. And I don't think that one's been released yet, but it'll be up soon. But just play with a metronome. That is the best way to just make sure you know where the one is. For new students, I like to have a counting metronome. So I will frequently use tempo, or another one is called Pro Metronome. There's Metro Timer. All three of those have versions that make a counting sound. 1, 2, 3, 4, so that you absolutely know where the one is. As you get better and better with a metronome, you can accent the one and you will know where the one is. And then eventually you'll know where the one is without the metronome or without the accent. But initially you want to make sure that you're practicing in such a way that you're not slowing yourself down. And in other words, that you're not that you think you know where the one is, but you don't. So I like to use counting metronomes when you first start. Just play with a metronome. Another great thing that I like to do in terms of working on timekeeping is play with drum machines, quote unquote. DM1 is another app. DM1 stands for Drum Machine 1. And this is a simple and great $5 app that simulates a bunch of classic drum machines. And there are lots of apps like this. What you're looking for is an app that has the ability for you to program a quick part easily, a 4 on the floor, or something really, really easy, and then play along with that and listen to see if your bass drums match the bass drums of the computerized drum. See if your snare is on top. See if there's any flams. That's another fun way to work on your time. In terms of propelling the music forward, continue to work on dynamics. And when you are playing along with songs, pay close attention to what your favorite drummers do. Whatever genre of music that you're into, pay close attention. One of the ways that we learn is by copying other drummers. And eventually you want to assimilate that and pull it through your filter so that it becomes your own thing, so that you don't sound like the drummers that you're into. And that takes time. But initially, the things that you like to listen to and the music that you're into, pay close attention and learn the parts of the drummers that you're into, and notice when they do drum fills or when they don't do drum fills, or if there's crashes or if there's not crashes, or all those sorts of things. If it gets louder at the chorus, pay close attention to those and work on those things and try to copy those things. That's a great way to start out, is by copying other drummers. And as soon as you feel like you're picking up those things, add your own flavor to it. And in terms of rhythmic composition, same thing. Pay close attention to the parts they're creating. Some drummers are, more adept at creating what's known in music as a motif, or these are, identifiable parts from part to part. And some are more just meat and potatoes. And again, some of it depends on the genre. But, think about, if you're playing with a singer-songwriter, what can I best do during this verse section to lay down good time, to make the song feel good, to stay out of the way of the vocal, to lock in with the bass player? What parts are going to make that happen the best? If you're playing progressive metal, okay, so in this part, the drummer and the guitar player and the bass player are all playing in unison. So how can I move around the kit that's going to make that sound super smooth, while I'm playing these 30-second notes at, 160 beats per minute? So those sorts of things, you have to think about the genre of the music and what works for that song. Remember, one of our primary functions is as a support person. And, there are some great drummers out there that don't necessarily work in a support context. And I always try to expose my students to some great drummers out there that are just, they're soloists. Look at Terry Bozzio. Look at what he's been doing for the past, couple of decades. If you look at an Annika Nilles, what she's doing is, the music that she's playing is primarily designed to accentuate and show off her drumming. So everything I'm saying here, as in any art, it can go a lot of different directions. There's a huge range of what I'm saying, a huge range of what can happen in the context of art and in music. These are, yes, the foundational elements of being a drummer. But you know what? If you want to be a drum soloist and you want to be the star and you want to be out front, you can do that. You don't have to rely on other musicians. You may have to hire other musicians to play, or you may need to play those parts, or you may need to find somebody to write music for you so that you can get out front and play. But that's the great thing about art and music, is it is a wide open field. It's probably going to be a little more difficult to be in the pop world if you're going to be a drum soloist. But my point is that you can do anything you want on the drums, but these elements of music, in terms of knowing how to keep time, and propelling a piece of music forward. Even if you're soloing, you've still got to propel your solo forward. And if you're soloing, you've got to be a good rhythmic composer. So these things are still there. So playing with a metronome, can't emphasize that enough. It's something that we all continue to do and try to get better at. And playing with drum machines, I'm big on that. Playing with computerized drum parts, because that is what you will commonly be called to do. These days, everyone's making a record on the laptop, and they're going to send you a track with drum tracks already on it and or click, and they're going to say, can you copy this or make it better? And in that case, you need to be adept at doing that. So to summarize, drummers need to be able to keep steady time with and without a click. And remember, this can be in the studio or live. Drummers need to be able to flow with the music if called for. And this could mean tempo flow or the mood, flowing with the mood of the song or the tone or dynamics. All these things are tools that we have at our disposal to make the song better. And then third, a good drummer has a creative element. I have in my notes here, good drummers are creative songwriters. I have that in quotes. So they create parts, even if subtle, even if it's just a little, even if you're just changing up the bass drum on the bridge. But we're creating little parts to accentuate the song or the music. And we do this using all the tools mentioned in the second one, tempo, mood, tone, dynamics. And by creating these drum parts, which are really rhythmic compositions. I hope this helps clarify in your mind what the role of a drummer is. And remember that with all these things and rules, if you will, that if you decide to take one stick and one tom-tom out on stage and try to make a career out of playing with one stick and one tom-tom because that's your vision, you can do that. These are sort of foundational elements that we've adhered to in the context of music and popular music. But remember that once you learn the rules, they're there to be broken. This is the Studio Drummer Chats. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, and I will talk to you on the next podcast.